Hello, Java Challenger. Today we are here with Jakob Jenkov. I'm pretty sure that you know him from his blog. It's one of the most popular websites for Java tutorials. And I consumed a lot of his content in his blog and I learned a lot from his high quality content. And he also has more than 25 years of experience as a software engineer. He's been working mostly with Java. He's also a Java champion and has his company, Jenkov Apps. And he's also a consultant and he's specialized in AWS. How are you, Jacob? Very happy to
I'm
have you
fine.
here.
I'm fine. I'm happy to be here. I hope you are fine too.
Oh yeah. Very, very happy to have you here. And I'm pretty sure that the Java developer who is watching us now will also learn a lot. So tell us a little bit about your story, Jacob. I know that your blog has been there for a while, right? Because I remember that I read your blog when I was maybe in the third company as a Java developer. I was reading your blogs. So tell me when you created your blog and, what was your motivation to share your knowledge so much and to produce so much high quality content for Java developers?
I started my website very early on. It was like, I don't know, 1998, 1999 or so. But in the beginning, I did not really have much technical content on it. It was just like a presentation. I created a company already back then, but I was working on the side as well as an employee in the beginning. And I started freelancing. No, I started working as a consultant already in 1999 with Java. And then 1 year later, I started freelancing and then I stayed freelancing for a lot of years. And so in the beginning, I just used that website as a little bit of like a presentation of myself. But what I learned is that this is not how freelance consultants are mostly sold. They're sold through agencies. The website wasn't really so necessary for that purpose. And then in around 2005, 2006, I was reading a lot of the popular websites at the time. I think one of the oldest one was the serverside.com. And that was one of the early Java blogs. And there was another one called Java Ranch, I think.
Java Range. Yeah, I remember that one. It's pretty good. It's still there. Still there. It's
It's now
from
it's
Gene
called Code.
Boyarsky.
And now it's called Code Ranch, right?
Yeah. This is from Gene Boyarsky.
Yeah, yeah. And then there was another
Yeah.
one called, I cannot remember, something with dev. I don't remember, but it was a website where you could post your own articles, but you could also post links to your own articles. Like, so you could post an article for their website, or you could just post a link to your own articles. And those were the website I were using to stay up to date. And what I realized from doing that is that a lot of the tutorials were hard to understand. And also, many of them were written in a language or in a style, which is the style that you learn to write in university, where you're like, you have to write this long introduction to why you are writing about what you're writing about. And then at some point, far down the article, you start actually talking about what you want to talk about. And those two things started annoying me a little bit. And I thought, now that I've seen this, maybe I could start writing something where I cut out a lot of the introduction, really turn it into a minimum, like one paragraph introduction, that's all. And also try to change the structure of the articles a little bit. And so I started doing that. And at some point, I got curious about how much traffic I was getting. So I started tracking it and I could see I was getting some traffic, and a lot of it was coming from Google. And it was early days. So there were not really that many competitors. So pretty quickly, the website started growing in traffic, and I could see that as I added more content, I started getting more traffic as well. And then I just kept growing it for a while.
Mhm.
And around 2012, 2013, in that area, I took some years and worked on it almost full time. And I got the website up to 1.6 million page views per month at the time.
Wow. That's unbelievable
But
for,
at that, yeah, at that time, and then, but what happened was then Google started changing the algorithms a lot, and I started talking about the traffic, and that started some of the competitors that I later got. And what since then happened is that a lot of these very big tutorial platforms, they emerged. Actually, these W3 schools already existed before I started. Their traffic inspired me a little bit. So I guess they also helped create one of their own competitors.
Mhm,
We were never directly competitors, but in the same space.
mhm.
And later, I know that some of the competitors that I have had for my website were started because I started talking about it. But I mean, this is also part of it, right? We also inspire each other, and sometimes, yeah, it leads to competition, but sometimes it leads to also collaboration and new ideas and things like that. And then, yeah, so the traffic peaked around there, 2013, 14. Then I have kept it alive since then, but the traffic has been like slowly going down. And at some point, yeah, I wasn't using social media a lot at the time. So at some point, I'm like, okay, let me try to use social media a little bit. So I have been doing that a little bit more. And I think since I started making a few YouTube videos. And I think since 2020, I tried a little bit, see if I could grow my YouTube channel a little bit. And it has grown. But it's not really huge or anything anymore, but I'm still keeping it alive. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, the last time I checked your YouTube channel, you had more than 20,000 subscribers, right?
Yeah. I think now I'm close to 42,000, I think.
Oh, that's amazing. That's really amazing. So your channel is focused mostly on Java, right? Java developers.
It's probably heavily biased towards Java developers, but I'm also posting some content about software design in general.
Mm.
And this is something that I've started the last, I think, 2 years, because I feel like there is something missing in the traditional software design literature that we are reading. I like design patterns and I've used them quite a lot. I also like many of the other ideas, but it seems like, for instance, design patterns, they are the result of a thinking process that a lot of these early, very good developers were using, and they only gave us the result of the thinking process. We are kind of missing the thinking process itself. And so that's what I'm thinking of, like, that's what I'm trying to focus on. Like, what were they thinking? How did they arrive at the design patterns? I mean, they write, of course, a little bit in the book about what the purpose of the design pattern is, but how did they discover it in the first place? These ideas, I think we are missing, and I think we should try to get to that somehow.
Yeah, that's something that you don't see on books. Like you said, they just explain the concepts, but they forget to say how they arrived to that conclusion. And I think that's a very important work because I don't think we will have such a content. This is very original, right?
And I think it's also difficult to completely explain this process. So I'm trying, but I'm not I'm not sure if I'm getting it right, but uh, I'm getting somewhere at least, right?
Yeah, I think one of the most difficult things to use design pattern is to know where you should use it, right? Because to learn design patterns, not that difficult, but then when you face the situation on your code base, knowing what's the right design pattern, that's a challenge.
Yeah, yeah. And like, for instance, just with the creational patterns, how do you determine which of these creational patterns you should use? Should you always use a factory or an abstract factory or dependency injection? Or is there some process that you can use to decide which of them is sufficient in the given situation that you're in? And this is what I'm trying to get at. I think I have arrived at a base for that, but I think there's still plenty of space for exploration into this.
Definitely. And Jacob, creating a blog is something challenging for many developers
Yeah.
because most developers, we as humans, we are afraid of criticism, right? So we want to make it perfect. We want to create, the perfect content, the perfect blog post. So what's your advice for developers who want to start their blogs and write technical stuff? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, like you say, if you start writing in order to show what you know, you will always run into the problem of like you say, you are afraid you're saying something wrong, or that you are missing something, or that someone who is better than you is reading it and thinking it is basic stuff that you're writing. Why are you writing this? This you can find this everywhere. And so one of the things that I think you should always think about is you're never writing for the people who are ahead of you. You're always writing for the ones who are behind you. And the longer you progress in your career, the more people will be behind you. Okay, so your audience will grow your entire life if you always write for those who are behind you. And in that way, just forget about those who are ahead. They will not consume your content anyways. I mean, they will, because at some point there will be something that you know they don't know. So they will come to your content sooner or later, for sure. But as a way of like disabling this, oh, what will all the gurus say to my content? Just forget about them. Just write for whoever is behind you, and they will be happy for what you're writing. So that is one thing. And the other thing I would say is allow yourself maybe to be slightly egoistic, in that it is okay to write something that is maybe not 100% correct or complete. Because when someone who knows a lot more than you reads it, they will point out the things you are missing. Not always, but at some point, someone will point out some things you're missing, and then you'll learn a lot from that. You can go back and you can correct the content, and now you are smarter. These people who are ahead, many of them don't have the time to write the blog posts. So if you write it, they point something out that is wrong, you go in and fix it. And after that, nobody knows that, or nobody remembers that you didn't know in the beginning. Only that person who corrected you. And then you have learned something, and the rest of the world can enjoy the updated article. Those are the two things I would say. Just don't be afraid that things are incorrect, because that's an opportunity for you to learn, and write for the people behind you.
Amazing. I never heard this perspective, um, like in that
You have
way.
not?
Yeah, in the way you said, I never
What
heard.
is
Yeah,
maybe I had one more point, and that is it can be a good idea to start from like a center somewhere. If you want to promote yourself, start from one topic and like cover that really, really well in depth. You will learn a lot. You will learn a lot in covering the depths, but it will also promote you as someone who knows something about that one specific topic, and then expand from there.
yeah. So you mentioned about people who are ahead of you reading and
Yeah.
consuming your content. Sometimes there will be haters, right? People who know a little bit more, right? And they watch your content, or they read your content, or they see your talks, and they're going to complain. Right? It's just how it is. By being a public person, by giving a talk, it's going to happen, right? There'll be haters. How do you deal with them?
I think I realized very early on the internet that there will always be haters. There's You cannot do anything. And I think that comes from actually from a different area of one of my interests. I've always been interested in what it takes to be successful or make a lot of money or whatever. Not that I ever succeeded in making like a ton of money or anything, but I was always interested in. And what I could always read from these entrepreneurs, what they were writing was, there will always be someone who hates you for having success. It's just the way it is. Once you stick a little bit above average, there will be haters. So this comes with the territory. If you want to go anywhere with anything, sooner or later someone will say something negative about it. And there's no way around that. I think the best way to handle someone doing that is either A, you respond as politely as you can, and a big portion of your haters will actually stop hating on you and just engage in the conversation, and some of them will switch and become your fans. I've seen this not so much with me, but I've seen this happen with others as well, where they engage with the haters and then at some point the haters stop hating and they become supporters instead. So either A, engage with them as politely as you can, or B, simply just ignore them. And they will go, most of them will go away at some point if they realize they cannot make you angry or make you sad or make you stop what you're doing, right?
Yes, and we have to have, strong emotional control, because if we react in an angry way, they will win. So
That's the whole idea of a troll, right?
yeah,
Like they are
yes,
trying to get you angry and do and say stupid things, or maybe make you sad and stop what you're doing. And then they have won.
exactly. Yeah, that's another important point to keep in mind, because we also have to remember the people we are helping, right? Because like we can't stop the work because of a couple of haters, and so many developers being helped with the content we share. So like it's even kind of selfish. Like if you stop, right?
Yeah.
It's not worth it.
No, and also you can, no matter how hard you try, your content will never be perfect for every single individual out there. If it's good for beginners, it's maybe not good for like people who are experienced. And if it's very good for experienced because it's skipping a lot of basic stuff, well, then the beginners will struggle. So you're never going to reach everyone with every piece of content. Just kind of let the negative people, just let them be. I don't have a lot of negative comments on my YouTube videos, for instance. It's very rare that it happens, but
That's very good. Another technique I use when there are haters is to not answer immediately.
yeah,
So I just wait, because if you respond immediately, you're very likely to answer emotionally. And that's what we want to avoid, right? So it's better to just read the message, wait, process, and then do like you said, answer to them politely,
yeah,
because that's a way to break them.
exactly. And I think another thing that could also happen by waiting, I think that is a very good idea. Another thing that could happen is that they kind of lose interest. They might see your content and feel like, I want to respond negatively right now. And then maybe 24 hours later, they too have cooled down and they're like, well, actually, I didn't mean it as hard as I said it. Or maybe they have lost interest and found someone else to troll instead, who they can like get a lot of feedback or engagement out of, right? So it's a very good idea to just give them, I don't know, half a day or a day or whatever, then you respond.
Exactly. And another question that I get a lot from Java developers, Jacob, is how to stay up to date with technologies. This is very challenging, right? Because I remember how technologies changed since I started my career. Like back in the days, it was enough to know Java, Java EE, or Spring. And like if you knew like the Java EE ecosystem, like GSF, the backend, if you knew some concepts of JPA well enough, you would be able to, handle the vast majority of the day-to-day challenges as a Java developer. But nowadays is different, because we have microservices. Now we have AI. So there are so many technologies, so difficult to keep up to date. So what is your advice and your strategy to stay up to date as a software engineer?
I think I completely agree with you. Like when I started, it was the same. You needed to know maybe one application server, you needed to know Java and Java EE and a database, and you were pretty much good to go, right? But today, the technological fragmentation, has become quite great or whatever. We have a lot of fragmentation. So we now have both Python backends and JavaScript backends or TypeScript on, and of course there were some PHP backends back then, but they still exist. We have Ruby, we have so many different Scala and Kotlin and all these different languages. And in the beginning, when the tech space was increasing, it was feasible to have a strategy of trying to keep up with all of it because it would make you more valuable as a developer. But at some point, these ecosystems, each on their own, became so great that it is impossible to keep up with all of them. And I think at some point, we as developers might be forced to start thinking more top down than bottom up. Like instead of learning the tools and then see what applications we can build with that, maybe we need to start thinking about what kind of applications that we are making, maybe even the space that we're working in, saying, I'm a game developer and I will learn only the stuff that I need for games, or I work in logistics, or I work only in finance or whatever. And then approach it from the job. See, what do I need to learn in order to implement this application that I'm working on? And then forget the rest for at least for a while. And then when you change job at some point, learn what you need to learn for that job and forget about the rest. It can be almost impossible to try to learn all of it. Now, obviously, you need to sometimes look outside of your little box, because otherwise you will stall your development or your progress. But in the beginning, that's what I do. I focus mostly on what do I need for this project that I'm working on. And once I know that pretty well, I will start looking outside of that box. And so that's one thing. And I think as a developer, that translates into my designs. I'm also, when I'm looking at designing applications, I'm also looking at how can I take things out of this application? How can I simplify this? Which frameworks are not really necessary? They are nice to have so that I don't have to learn them. If they are just giving me like 2-3% convenience, then out with them and then let me write it by hand instead.
Yeah, it's an interesting point what you said, that with time we're gonna have to think more from the top, right? So I think
Yeah.
this is kind of happening already because of AI, right?
Yeah.
So the code, AI can create the whole code for us nowadays, right? AI will create the code, sometimes wrong, it's not perfect yet, but it's pretty good. It's pretty impressive already. And with time, that's what I think is going to happen. And it's already happening, right? So we're going to have to think a lot more about the design of the software. We're going to have to think a lot more about the requirements, how we can solve the requirements problems, because that's something, it's going to be hard for AI to solve that. I think there's just some advancements to happen with AI to reach to that level. But yeah, I agree with you that in a short time, obviously we need to know what's going on behind the scenes, right? It's not just to add the code and just put there. You need to know what are the concepts and the fundamentals. But it's already happening that the software developers who are the most valuable are software engineers, not programmers anymore, right? When I started my career, a programmer was extremely valuable. We would get the requirements, we would code, and that was it. But nowadays, we have to think a lot more as software engineers. The game changed.
That's true. And this became obvious for me once I started working more on architecture. Because once you start thinking in terms of architecture, as a developer, you're like, I would like to make my own building blocks, or maybe I will use some frameworks or whatever. But I am a Java developer. I'm a this, I'm a that. Once you start looking at it from an architectural perspective, you're more like thinking in, okay, so we need to get this system connected to that system. Are there any finished building blocks I can use to do this faster? Because actually, I'm not maybe interested in knowing how to connect this system to another system, because next time I need to work on something else, I won't have to solve that same problem again. And so that's when I kind of realized, okay, as an architect, I'm happy with all these things being done for me already. So I can just kind of like connect one thing to another. And that was like the first time I was like exposed more to the top down way of thinking in terms of my own career and my own function at work. But I think you're completely right that AI will force the developers to take the exact same perspective and start saying, okay, what am I developing as a system? And I think at some point we might stop caring about the programming languages, right? Because if it's in Java today, then you can maybe ask it to say, can you maybe rewrite this for Python? Or can you maybe just let me write this little thing or show me this part of the code in Python. Then I fix it, and then you can translate it back to Java or whatever it is afterwards, right? We have to stop thinking, or we don't have to, but maybe we will end up not thinking in terms of programming languages anymore, but thinking in terms of just abstract logic.
Definitely. I totally agree with that. It's already happening. And so we briefly talked about uh, technologies. So what are the technologies that you are focusing the most now?
Right. I have like two focus domains or areas, and then one is what I'm interested in for my job, or like, as working as an architect and an engineer. And the other thing is what I think is interesting in my spare time, just as a hobby. And I could imagine that I might still be doing a lot of hobby programming for a long time, even just like paints are still paints for fun, even if they could get AI to make a much nicer painting for them. They like the process. I think for work, cloud technologies and this whole space and ecosystem is where my main focus is at the moment, and especially from an architectural perspective. I think we have already seen that the clouds have changed a lot since they started, and I think they will continue to change. Like we have seen the emergence of serverless, and I think once we get AI into the clouds, the whole cloud might change. Today we see that individual services, maybe at that point we stop seeing services and we just say, here's a project. You have specified to the cloud what kind of system you want. The cloud did something for you in the back, and that's it. The
Mhm.
same way as we may stop focusing on the programming languages in the cloud. We may no longer care about the services. Like the interface becomes the prompt. Maybe we need to know a little bit behind the scenes, but
Yeah. Yeah. I saw one post of yours on LinkedIn, and I thought it was very interesting because you were talking about the interview processes from companies nowadays. So, like, for some reason, maybe because of the top companies, the big tech companies, they are doing, the algorithms and system design interviews. All the other companies are following the same process. And as I remember, you mentioned that this is not required for every kind of company, right? Because realistically, that's not the day-to-day problems we're going to face as software engineers, right? So what's your opinion on that? Do you think the company should continue doing the same type of interviews as they are doing, or they should change to more realistic day-to-day problems? This is also a challenge, right? Because it's difficult to put a real problem in an interview. So, but yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
obviously, or like, not obviously, but I think my opinion on that is that you should interview for what people are actually going to do for you. If you're interviewing for this, but they're going to do something else over here, you're hiring someone who is maybe either underqualified or like qualified for something else, or maybe overqualified for the job that they're getting, and maybe they get bored and they leave. As a developer, of course, I like knowing what's going on down to a very deep level, and I also find it to be very useful still. But that might change once my interface becomes only the AI prompts. Then maybe at some point I will no longer care because I don't need to optimize my code. The AI will do that for me, right? I will just say, this is my specification. Maybe that is what we end up interfacing with the machine with, is some kind of specification language. And then it's up to the AI to implement it and improve it over time. So today you might have one implementation, and in a week the AI figures out that, oh, actually I can do this better. And so it just improves itself, and you don't need to care about that.
Yeah.
So why would you need to know how to popularly invert a binary tree if you will never actually do it? It seems to me like where we're heading is that engineers are people who can take a fuzzy problem, like like a rhetorically phrased problem, and turn that into unambiguous rules. And once you have formulated these unambiguous rules, the computer might be able to do the rest for us in the future.
Yes. Well, nowadays, our job as software developers is a lot about ambiguity,
Yeah.
right? We need to eliminate ambiguity, and we need to consume a lot of the complexity. Sometimes we get stories in our sprints, which you have no idea what you need to do, but then you have to go through the story. You have to understand what's going on there. Have to understand the architecture, external systems. Obviously, depending on the company we are working for, it's going to vary the complexity. But yeah, I see that we don't need to know like such a low level concept for our day-to-day jobs for the vast majority of the companies. Obviously, if you're working for a tech company, then I think it makes sense because, for example, if you're developing a programming language, then you have to know data structures. Then you have to know sorting algorithms. But
Yeah.
for business projects, it really doesn't make any sense. So unfortunately, the companies, they follow a rule that, just because it's the big companies, it's the big techs, they are ahead, but it really doesn't solve their problems, right? So it would be much more useful for them to hire a developer who knows about creating good quality code or creating good architecture or, solving the real day-to-day problems, right? Other than writing data structures. This doesn't make any sense for an enterprise project. Like yes, you could improve a little bit the performance, but like it's so like it doesn't make any sense. It would be a lot more impact to create decent microservices using the concepts, right? Like when you use message broker or when you use multi-thread applications, like this would be a lot more useful. But like manipulating the structures, really it's
I,
not useful for enterprise projects.
I agree with you. And I think you have a very good point that I was kind of thinking that we as developers might, that's what I said earlier, like we might need to think about what kind of business area we are working with, but we might also think about what layer of the stack that we are working with, right? If we are application developers at the top of the stack, then we may not need to know all the details that people at the bottom of the stack need to know. But you are exactly right. If I am a developer at the bottom of the stack, I'm making the Java virtual machine, then I need to know a lot of different things than from someone who is making like a finance application. But there is something else that I've seen happening at the top of the stack, like in the enterprise space, and that is a lot of the applications that used to be developed in-house. They are now being replaced with software as a service. So like this old idea of an enterprise developer might to some degree disappear and be replaced with the architects, and the architect's job will then be to integrate a lot of software as a service. And so if you're working out in the software as a service company, then you need to know a lot more than if you are just in the enterprise. There's a lot of stuff going on at the moment, and yeah, when it comes back to like how do you keep up with that, it's really difficult. I think you need kind of have to start thinking about more
Yeah.
than just what programming language do I want to work with, but also about what kind of companies do I want to work with.
Yes, I think that's a better question to ask because like trying to learn everything randomly, it's impossible. Totally impossible. Like, it's a waste of time as well. Because, for example, if you want to work for a big tech, but you are studying design patterns or studying Java concepts, it won't help the developer at all because whoever wants to work for the big techs, they need to work on algorithms and system design. Those are the things we need to be good at to work for those companies as a software engineer.
Yeah.
So, but if you want to work for a fintech, then it might be not necessary to do those code challenges with algorithms and system design.
There's one other, like in my, in my spare time, one of the things that I'm looking at is like decentralized computing. I think that is quite interesting. And one of the things that I'm looking a little bit at is when we look at the web today, we have like what I call a dumb client and a smart server, where the client cannot do anything unless the server is providing an application for it. And I would kind of like to switch that around so that we get a smart client and a dumb server, so that we have a lot of clients. If the clients were the application platform somehow, I don't know exactly how that would look. And then the servers would just allow all the clients to communicate. We could create something different. It would not be appropriate for every kind of application out there, but for some things it would be really useful, I think. For at least for like consumer grade computing, probably not for like big enterprise stuff. But this is more of a creative endeavor. I don't expect that to be like a big business or anything.
Yeah. So yeah, it's good that you talked about business because that's my next question for you, Jacob. So I see that you have your company, Jenkov Apps. So I saw that you have your company for 12 years. So I'm curious about this road, right? Because it's something, it's a path you can take. Like after senior developer, you can create your own company and provide your service. So can you uh, tell me more about that? Can you tell me more how you get
Yeah.
customers, for example? This is difficult for developers, right? To, learn some marketing, you learn, to have a company, that's a big challenge.
Yeah. I am not an expert in building companies. Just let me just say that up front. The company that I created in the beginning was for a consulting. And in the beginning, I did a little bit of consulting on the side. But at some point, I was like a full-time freelance consultant. And that was what the main use of that company was. At some point, I started focusing on building my website up. And like I also published some books. I self-published some books on Amazon and tried to make some money from that. That worked for a while. But at some point, both the book sales and like the website started going down. And like also that, not only that, the advertising money on the internet started going down as like more and more people were using ad blockers and other kinds of tools or whatever to avoid watching ads. So that whole business model got harder and harder and harder. And you can see also that most of the newspapers today, they have a very hard time surviving on like an advertising financed model. So that is one thing, like when it comes to business, I would advise against is believing that you can finance your company only through advertising. That is going to be very hard. I also spent some time looking into how YouTubers make their money, and like the really, really big YouTubers, they make maybe only less than 5% of their money they make comes from the ads from YouTube. The rest comes from sponsorship deals or selling merchandise or doing events on the side or whatever. Like, so that's what I would say. Advertising, that's like a tiny little bonus on top. That should not be your business. That's what I learned, at least for myself. And when it comes to publishing, I also realized that if you try to pursue or chase the money, so you're writing about whatever is you see that gap in the market here, and then you see a gap in the market over there. That's what I did in the beginning with the books on Amazon. Well, the problem is that the book that you wrote over here you will not be able to transfer any of the readers to this other book, which is about a completely different topic. So you have to think really in terms of you really have to think in terms of marketing, building a brand out of yourself. And if you're like going in too many different directions, it's better to split that brand into multiple brands. Otherwise, people get confused. So if you have a website about food, don't mix it with a website you have about programming. Like create separate brands and then let people discover those brands differently. So I think that's probably what I have learned. Now I'm trying to build some things again, but I think at this point I have decided not to care too much about the money and just build the technology that I want to see exist. And then if there will come any money out of it, that's fine. And if not, I don't really care at the moment.
So that's nice. So you are developing a cloud service or some kind of framework. So what exactly you are developing?
Oh, what I'm working on is technologies within like the decentralized computing space. And so I spent some time looking at what would it require to have like a coherent, like plug and play decentralized computing ecosystem. And so within that, what I have identified so far is I need like a standard data format. That would be nice. So we don't have to all invent everything. We could use JSON, but there are some things that are missing in JSON that annoy me. So that's why I said, okay, I need something that is also good at sending binary data or tabular data. And I don't want to have to switch to CSV just because I have tabular data. So that's what I'm looking at. Within that space, I looked at peer-to-peer network algorithms because some of the classic ones are good for some types of systems, but they are not very good for like media broadcasting and multicasting. And so I spent some time seeing if I could come up with a new peer-to-peer like topology that supports that better. And I have come up with one. It's not like 100% original, but it's not something that was already out there. It's like probably like a variation of something that was already out there. I have realized that retrospectively, but that's how it often is. You think nobody has made this before, and then you make it, and then you see, oh, okay, this is pretty close. Oh, that's also pretty close. But you don't often you don't discover that afterwards, until afterwards, right? So it's within that space. I'm also trying to think a little bit about could there be a different way of displaying or like presenting data online than the web technologies. And I think there are some interesting possibilities if you are willing to like rethink it from scratch. So that's what I'm working on. It's probably never going to finish. It's one of those kinds of projects, but I mean, that's not true. Some things are finishing, but I will probably never finish it all.
Have you considered creating an open source for your project?
There will definitely be parts of it that will be open source.
Mm,
I'm not completely sure if all of it should be open source because I
mm.
still like there's still something, a little voice in the back of my head
Yeah,
saying
definitely. Yeah.
maybe I could monetize something one day.
Yeah,
But there are definitely a lot of this project that has to be open standards or open source for the project to make sense at all. So it's probably like 80% of it has to be open. Otherwise, the last 20% don't make any sense.
amazing. Yeah, and by creating an open source, you're gonna have help from the community, right?
Exactly.
And you have many followers, so I'm pretty sure that many of your audience, many Java developers from your audience, will be interested in contributing with your project.
Yeah, I know some who has already said they would like to join. I just haven't found a good model yet.
That's awesome. I think you know more developers should be encouraged to create new things, I know it's a big challenge, but we need more of this courage, right? To go for the blue ocean and just try new things, try new technologies, try creating new technologies. It's very difficult, but it's worth it.
You learn a lot from it, even if you end up failing, right?
Exactly. So obviously in your 12 years of a company, you had many customers, right? So how did they find you? They found you through your blog or through your portfolio, or how your customers found you to provide your service?
The way I worked as an on-site freelancer. And so that was like as a consultant, basically. So I was hired in by big companies to help them with some projects where they were understaffed. That's usually how it worked. And they usually do not hire freelancers directly. So they will go to some consulting agencies, and these agencies will have freelance resumes, like CVs registered, and they will search through their database, and your CV will pop up and they will contact you. So they take a cut of the salary that you're making, but they're also doing a lot of work. They are constantly talking to the clients, to the different clients, and also keeping you in the loop of what is going on, right? So at first, like the first time when you hear that they might take 20% of the money and you feel like they're not doing anything, well, but they have been doing a lot of work while you were just walking at home and sitting at home playing computer, waiting for the phones to ring, right? So they are doing something for that money, and I have learned to just appreciate how much easier selling yourself gets by using a broker, essentially, because they're really motivated to sell you. They won't earn any money unless they sell you, right? So, but
Exactly.
But I mean, when it comes to something like if you had your own product or like your own services, I think you will have to do what they are also doing, and that is get on LinkedIn. I think today the SEO game is very hard. When you look at Google search results, there's so much noise in the search results today. I am actually not using Google very much anymore because there's so many ads and so many excerpts from websites I'm not interested in or whatever. So I'm trying to get found that way. I think can be hard. It's probably not impossible, but it's hard. I think the social media channels are probably your best bet, and like trying to build a brand in there and try to get in contact with people in there and share content regularly. But these are things that everyone in this working in this area has already heard about. So I don't think I'm providing anything new. I think personal network, if you have a personal network over the years, it will usually expand. And that is also a good way to find customers. But it's hard. It's a lot of work. And I think what I've realized is that marketing and selling is like half the business. You think like you develop a product and then you just need like 5% marketing on top. No, forget about that. At least half of your business will be marketing yourself. And I think I remember the computer game Hitman was one of the first games to be developed in Denmark. And so in the beginning, there was like almost no computer game industry in Denmark. And then this one game, they made it. And then I think at some point they sold this IO Interactive. They were sold to EA or something like that. I don't remember exact how the business model or like the acquisition was or who bought them, but they told us afterwards, or like they released afterwards, that I think the budget was like the development budget was like 1/3 of the total budget. I think they added like 2/3 on top for marketing. So they whatever it cost to create the game, like develop it, they doubled that and spent on marketing, and that kind of made me realize, okay, there's a part of business that is very important that we tend to overlook. I think sometimes we developers, we have it can have a tendency to romanticize these stories about how someone built something so great that no marketing was necessary, right? Like this, it was posted on Slashdot, and immediately it was a big success. But these stories are so rare compared to how many products are developed that I think it is a very bad business strategy to hope for that.
Definitely, marketing is very difficult. As developers, it's even harder because it's not something we learn in the college. And we developers are very logic people. So it gets even harder because you need to know how to connect with your audience. You need to know how to connect with your customers, right?
Yeah.
And you need to show that you can solve their problems. But, it's easy to say, but it's very hard to do. Very hard to do. So
It's
definitely it's not something to underestimate. Marketing is tough, really difficult.
it's tough, and we get back to this earlier question of yours with like starting a blog, like because once you start promoting yourself in the beginning, maybe a big part of the network you have on this social media will be other developers, and you're like, oh, now I have to sell myself, and the first people who see it are the exact same people I would also see my blog posts. This kind of like putting yourself out there and using this marketing language and like trying to look cool or whatever. This a lot of us as developers have a hard time, getting through that obstacle and like learning how to promote yourself without sounding like an idiot or like bragging or exaggerating what you're able to do or whatever. But you have to learn sometimes this language. Some of it is a language, but it's still possible to promote yourself without lying too much and with like and still like keeping your integrity. But that it takes time to find that voice.
It takes time. Yeah. To show that you solve a specific problem to specific audience. There's so many strategies, so many tools in the market that, you can use ads, you can use social media, you can use, anything that you become visible.
Yeah.
It's
You
type of
can go
marketing.
you can go present at a conference.
Yeah. I know many consultants who do their marketing like that. Basically, they give talks and they do networking in the conferences, and someone would reach out to them and then they would offer their service. So I know many developers who went to that road, and I'm pretty much sure it works. Like giving talks to conferences, someone will see you and they will hire your service.
But I mean, doing a conferences takes a time, both
Yeah,
in terms of preparation and you have to fly there and spend some time there. So this is also it sounds free, but it's not free at all.
it's not free. It's a lot of work as well. Another question I get a lot from Java developers is if it's worth it to be a generalist or to be a specialist. What is your opinion on that? Because have a point of view that some years ago, to be a specialist was good. But nowadays, with so many technologies, microservices, I feel like if you know too much of one technology and you forget all the others, it's impossible to do your job.
I I tend to agree with you that it was the same for me when I started. Like learning the technology bottom up was good. But I think you're right that today you have to approach your job top down.
Top
So
down.
you learn just enough of the technologies that you need to solve the given problem. And then you kind of let go at that point. And maybe if you have time, spare time, maybe you study it a little bit more than that. And if you're lucky that the business area that you're working in does not require a lot of different technologies, then you can probably become really good at those technologies. But yeah, like we talked about earlier, maybe it's time for us to start thinking about becoming business specialist, but technologically generalist, something like that.
Yeah, that's quite rare. I think that's a position the market will pay a lot because that's something it's difficult for developers to, to be the bridge between the business and the technical stuff. So definitely this will be one of the rare positions
Yeah.
in the market.
But this would have happened even without AI because more and more of what we are doing is being solved by frameworks and services. And so you end up being more of a configurator than a developer, still like an engineer or like an architect, more than you are like writing assembly code or anything like that.
Uh, That's the same feeling I have, because I feel that nowadays, as software developers, we're not creating the business requirements code anymore. We are kind of configuring applications. We don't write much code anymore.
Not like we did 10, 15 years ago.
No. Nowadays, I see a lot of gluing microservices together, or using that security technology or not, or what tests you're going to use your application, or what the message broker you're going to use, or you do a meeting with your team and explain, oh, let's use this technology. Those are the pros and cons.
Or like you integrate with Salesforce, who is like far
Yeah,
up in the app stack already. So you just kind of need to configure it, and you're not actually
exactly.
developing the application. You're just telling it a little bit about it. You're just customizing it a little bit, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And there is the uh, SaaS applications where
Mm.
everything is there and you just need to configure some things, and you need to invoke an endpoint, and then you're going to be doing what you need. But to do what you need to do several meetings, need to make sure that you're making the right decision. So nowadays I see, our job a lot more like that. Software engineers. I see that programmers profession. I think it's pretty much that. Like from what I see in the market, at least, developing, we still develop code, obviously, but most of the companies, most of the challenges we face on a day-to-day job is more focused on software engineering. Awesome. So what are the most important Java ecosystem technologies in your opinion? I know there's a lot as well, but what's your opinion on that?
What are the most important ones? Well, even though we are talking a lot about, approaching uh, development top down, I think some of the most important ones are the ones that are being developed bottom up, because as they move up expand their functionality, us that use them get to work higher and higher and higher in the stack and closer to business. I definitely think that something like GraalVM or GraalVM or whatever. I don't know exactly how you pronounce that name, but
GraalVM, yeah. GraalVM.
I think I see that as being like really important, first of all, because it gives us one virtual machine that can run many different languages. That's one thing, but it also enables us to compile to native, and compiling to native gives us as Java developers a new set of options that we didn't have before, that for 20 years we didn't have. Right now we have them. And so that is one thing. And I think another thing that looks very promising is like Tornado V, which is providing GPU compute for Java. And I can
Nice.
see that Tornado VM has inspired, I think, Project Babylon, I think,
Hmm.
at Oracle. So now Java will probably at some point get real GPU compute APIs directly in Java, in the Java virtual machine itself, or like within some APIs itself. So that's very interesting, I think. Framework wise, I am not sure which frameworks are going to be most important. I'm obviously Spring and Spring Boot is very popular. I haven't used it much myself, but I know it's being used a lot out there. And the same
Yeah.
with Quarkus, I think seems like one of the obvious ones. But somehow I have a feeling that there will also, and I mean, if we look back at the history, then this has happened several times before. I kind of have a feeling that we will see some more technological shifts where some of the ways we are doing things today will disappear and be replaced by something else. And like could definitely have the potential to do that. But also in other areas, I think that once those shifts happen, we will probably see new ecosystems emerge and be important. So I cannot predict exactly what those are, but I don't think we have seen like that. Like, for instance, the entire crypto space, like Web3, as they call it. I haven't been keeping too much up with it, but they look like they have some very advanced tech stacks that are only somewhat similar to web applications, right? Like maybe you are still using JavaScript and some kind of DOM tree or whatever, like a browser to render it, but everything underneath it, like the entire backend, is just completely different. And we haven't reached the tipping point where that is has become the predominant internet application model. But if a tipping point was reached, all of a sudden we would like all have to learn something completely new.
Yeah. And you mentioned about AI. Do you think developers should learn about AI technologies, or they should learn only how to use the tools, the AI tools?
I think learning to use the tools is where you should start. And then, of course, at some point it can be a good idea to learn a little bit more about the algorithm so you kind of have a feeling for what they're good at and what they're not so good at and how to tweak them maybe. But I think it will be the same as in many other areas. Only if you really have to be like an AI toolkit developer do you really need to know everything in detail. Otherwise, you would probably be using like a toolkit, and you just kind of need to know how to use the AI toolkit. And just like you use a linked list, you don't code a linked list yourself. You just use one that's already made for you.
Exactly. So my last question to you, Jacob, is what book would you recommend for Java developers?
For Java developers?
Yeah,
Oh, that's a good question. It's been a while since I read a book about a Java related topic.
it can be a book that would be useful for software engineers in general as well, because for as Java developers, we need to know about microservices, about the cloud, about multi-threading. There are lots of
Mm.
things involving Java, so it would be fine if you can also recommend a software engineering book, for example. That would be amazing.
I think O'Reilly has some interesting books about software architecture. And I think any developer, no matter regardless of the language that you are working with, should know something about software architecture. I think the last book that I read that was like really opening I felt like I really learned a lot was was a book called something like, was it parallelization algorithms or modern algorithms, like algorithms for modern hardware, something like that. But this was not about Java. This was about how modern CPUs and like memory and these kind of things work, and like the instruction sets down at the CPU level. And how do you design algorithms that can take advantage of these instructions? Because all of a sudden, some of the things you learned in university are no longer true because the hardware makes them untrue. And yeah, so this was this was the last book that I read where I was like, oh my God, I'm really learning something new here. Like this is changing the way I'm looking at software development. Unfortunately, a lot of the code is in C or assembly language. So if you have if you don't have any experience with that, it might be a little bit hard to read. But I did a lot of assembly language programming as a teenager for the Amiga 500, the Motorola chipset, and then later on the early PCs, the 486 and the Pentium after that. So there's still some of these old assembly language instructions that I can remember. So that's kind of funny. But it was really interesting to see how, to learn about how when you use some instructions, the CPU will throttle the frequency. And so you might think that you are running at 5 gigahertz, but when you're using these instructions, the CPU will throttle a little bit down to maybe 4.5 gigahertz. So like there's so many things going on inside of a CPU today that it can be really hard to calculate precisely how your algorithm will perform. I think that was interesting. I cannot remember exactly what the name was, but the thing is, it's a free book. It's available online. I can send the link to you. You can maybe post it in the notes below this video, right? In the
Yeah,
top, in the
yeah.
description.
I'll definitely post this book in description, so you can read the description later, and you can get the book as well. So, wow, thank you so much Jacob. It was amazing. Uh, to learn from you, and it's amazing that you are sharing your experience with the Java community, with software developers. And I'm pretty sure that the Java Challengers audience learned a lot from you. And yeah, I can appreciate that you are here.
Thank you for having me on. I hope it was interesting to someone out there.
Oh, it was definitely. For me, it was, and I'm pretty sure that for the Java Challengers audience, it's going to be awesome as well.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jacob. Cheers.
See you online.
See you.